I'm Steve Gilman, and this is Brand Story, where we help you build stronger, more sustainable brands by sharing insightful conversations with brand leaders, marketers, and professional storytellers. My guest today is Maya Guice.
Sometimes people make the mistake of creating an experience, telling a story that only speaks to one perspective. No, you can't please everybody all the time, but really being able to define your audience and being honest about who those people are and genuinely interested in the things that they care about sort of allows you to tell them a story, again, that connects and that will bring them along. People really take for granted just the hard work involved in creating an idea that affects people.
Maya is the director of strategy at BRC Imagination Arts, who partners with brands including Johnnie Walker, Ford, and NASA, to name a few, and they translate brand and cultural stories into transformative human experiences. And Maya co-develops and oversees the positioning and business strategy for BRC. Not a small job, including all brand and growth-related activities such as content, PR, and events. She received an MBA from the Drucker School of Management at Claremont, and she now serves as vice chair of the advisory board of directors. She also produces and hosts a podcast called Masters of Storytelling at BRC, and that features conversations with storytellers across the creative spectrum. Hi, Maya. Welcome to Brand Story.
Hello, Steve. Thanks for having me. You make me sound special.
Yeah, you're special. You have a lot of credentials, and the work you all do is amazing. And my very first question for you, since we're recording video, is how about that collection of guitars behind you?
We're sitting in what we call the music room, and as my dad would say, if you have guitars on the wall, it means you don't play guitar. No.
You just collect them.
Yeah, no, but we've done a lot of work with Les Paul, and so that was sort of I think the start of our guitar collection, but we've done a lot of work like with we did a project called the Chicago Blues Experience. We work with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So music is very much central to a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah, I've noticed that, but that is an incredible collection behind you. I'm a guitarist, and I'm just drooling over some of those guitars. Let's talk a little bit about some of the work you guys do at BRC. And there's a project you finished recently that I dug into that is just astounding. You did it for Johnnie Walker in Edinburgh, Scotland. It's like an 8-floor brand experience extravaganza, really. It's insane. It's so intense. Can you tell me a little bit about that project? I think it illustrates what you guys do really well.
Yeah, well, I started at BRC in 2020, or the second half of 2020, and this was when this whole project was really just kicking up into high gear. And so this was probably my first deep dive into BRC's work, and it's beautiful because it's sort of the nature of this project touches a lot like on everything that BRC does. So I'll zoom out before we zoom back into Johnnie Walker Princess Street, but so Johnnie Walker Princess Street was the centerpiece of a 185 million pound investment by Diageo. It's a large alcohol holding company. And so they were interested in really reinvigorating Scotch whiskey tourism. So they were looking for a way to not only bring people to the center of Scotland, Edinburgh, but then also sending people back out across Scotland. And so Johnnie Walker was one, or Johnnie Walker Princess Street was one of what was, I think, 12 distilleries that BRC sort of either was hands-on or oversaw the sort of redevelopment and redesign of these distilleries. So there's Johnnie Walker Princess Street in Scotland, in Edinburgh, excuse me. And then we have what's called the Four Corner brand homes. There's Glenkinchie, which is the garden home of Johnnie Walker. There is Clynelish, the Highland home. There's Cardew, which is the Speyside home. And Colilla, which is the Isla home. And then there were others, of course, as a part of that. But the idea being that sort of with Johnnie Walker Princess Street, we wanted to break a lot of the mythology around Scotch, exposing Scotch to a new audience and really explaining to people that unlike what we've heard, which is that you have to be old and in a leather chair and drinking Scotch neat, it's that, you can enjoy your whiskey any way you like it. So a lot of the focus on that project was talking about flavor, the way that a blend is made, because Johnnie Walker is a blend, and then the sort of single malts, which are the Four Corners, how they sort of go into how these like master distillers, just by taste and smell, honestly, are able to craft these new blends of whiskey, very much in the tradition of Johnnie Walker himself. So or I should say John Walker, the man. But yeah, no, it's an incredible brand home, as you said. It's literally, I call it a department store size brand experience. There's retail, there's a concert venue, there are two restaurants and bars, and then two floors of experience, sort of a walkthrough experience through the history of Johnnie Walker and again how it's made, the flavor, tasting. But yeah, I mean, it's a really extraordinary project that sort of speaks to this larger exercise in developing whiskey tourism in Scotland.
That's amazing. I mean, there's so much storytelling that goes into that. You know, the four corners and trying to get people to understand the history and the science and the emotion of whiskey and pulling that all together. That's no small task.
No, I mean, it took years in, hundreds of people from the Diageo side, from the BRC side, and then, of course, all the different partners and vendors that had to come together on that project. I mean, they made custom dispense systems that save an incredible amount of glass bottles every year. And one of the most incredible things about Johnnie Walker Princess Street is that before you arrive, when you buy your ticket, or when you arrive on site, you fill out a quiz. It's the first thing you do. Like, do you like toffee? How much you like the taste of bananas? And questions like this. And then you get a flavor profile that becomes a wristband that you put on, a color wristband. And this sort of becomes your flavor profile or helps guide sort of the tasting decisions that you make on the rest of your whiskey tour and experience. And so to that end, like everyone that comes to Johnnie Walker, even if you're with a group of people, everyone's having a slightly different experience, very much catered to their tastes. But again, just sort of explaining and exposing people to the variety of whiskey and how many different ways it can be enjoyed. Um, but yeah, I mean, there was the Johnnie Walker story, and then each of the distilleries has their own history and heritage. The story of Cardew. Cardew was the first, I think, female-owned distillery, or one of the first, and that's just an incredible story about female leadership, and perseverance. She was such a pioneer. So but yeah, I mean, honestly, it was the coming together of many stories, that had to weave into this one much longer, extensive story.
And the more I've read about the project, the more amazed I am. How many years did it take to execute this?
3 Well, I'll tell you, COVID happened in the middle as our president was talking about how we all of a sudden, now we get to, produce this giant brand home from our living rooms. And so, but I think they started work in 2017. And then the last brand home opened in, I wanna say 2022. So it was about 5 years, but, there's a lot of work that has to happen before we even get brought to the table, and so I'm sure this was a much longer process and conversation on the side of Diageo.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge brand, and also it sounds like the 5 years you all spent on it, it's almost like all pure storytelling, pulling it all together, making it emotionally appealing for people. And then I love how you all personalize the journey too, with that wristband, so that you're making it to where it's accessible to younger people, people who don't consider themselves Scotch drinkers. It's really brilliant work.
100%. And there's a lot of love, I'll tell you. There's a lot of love that gets poured into these stories, just from our side of just making sure that these stories actually connect with people. It's one thing if you wanna focus on all of the surface level graphics and media and, design, but, like, really digging into design and story requires just an added layer of, like, heart, and I think that you feel that in a lot of these work, and I mean, I visited a lot of these distilleries. I'm still not a huge whiskey drinker, but let me tell you, I do love surprising people with just how much I know about what goes into making it, and so but yeah, it's been a real joy to work alongside these creatives, as they bring these stories to life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, the scale of that kind of brand experience design and execution is stunning. And you all have done some other amazing things. I was just sitting here thinking while I was listening to you tell that story of all the complexity that went in and how human that is, that you all work on some really cool stuff. I mean, you're not exactly doing the most boring, dry stories. You're talking about Scotch and the history and the humanity of it, and then working with music and Les Paul and all these incredible stories. That must be a blast.
It is, and I'll tell you part of what makes it exciting is the variety. I like to joke that, one day we're working with NASA scientists, and the next minute we're working on the Canadian maple syrup experience, and then we're working with Heineken doing a beer experience, and then we get to work on we worked on the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. So it's just like every day you get something new. It never gets boring. And we have a lot of, and part of the reason why I love this team is because everyone is genuinely curious. So when we get one of these projects, it's so fun to jump in and like really understand the subject, and so for us, it's like it's like a master class in each subject every time we get to do one of these projects, even if it's just the early like business modeling strategy work.
I think that's probably one of the best things about our industry. Like if you're in brand or even if you're in marketing, wherever you land in business strategy around our industry, it never gets boring. You're always learning a new client's business, you're learning their challenges, what their goals are, and you get to explore these worlds. So you need to kind of be part creative, part business minded, and part anthropologist.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the work itself, experience design, it's so interdisciplinary. And again, everyone here, and I don't say this lightly, but this is one of the most diverse teams I've ever been in, where it's just people not only just in like color, but just, an education background where people are from geographically, socioeconomic backgrounds, faith traditions, gender identities. And so you really get this like the everyone's unique experiences really lend to, again, the decision making that comes together at the table. It's the people, the individuals sitting around the table that really lend to, again, creating a story that connects with whatever audience we're speaking to. And so that curiosity, I think, lends to taking an extra look, or maybe looking at something from an angle that isn't straight on. And again, it inherently shows up in the work.
Having a team that has vast experience like that and brings so many different things to the table is really the key to doing something that's going to resonate with people. So it sounds like you guys have the right people. I don't know if you know the book For the Culture by Dr. Marcus Collins. Anyway, I had him on the podcast and he talks about how, when you're trying to reach an audience, you need representation. You need people of really diverse backgrounds to be able to reach people in the communities that they're in, whether it's like Scotch fans or people who are car enthusiasts. There's all these different communities of experience and being able to like use empathy and have different points of view to build something like this, I'm sure is crucial.
Yes. Also, something we talk a lot about is having a diverse team and different points of view at a table. It allows for the socialization of ideas. And because, with whiskey, right, we have people on the team, the creative director, Christian Lachelle, he's our chief creative officer. He's a huge whiskey drinker, right? Just like personally. And so his fascination with the subject, when you put someone like me at the table, or like, I'm kind of apathetic, or I was to begin with about whiskey, like having those 2 points of view, like if we can create an idea that speaks to both, that excites him as like a serious drinker and me as a very casual drinker, like just even a non-fan, like if this idea catches both of our attention, now we know it works. And so sometimes people make the mistake of creating an experience, telling a story that only speaks to one perspective or one lens. And unfortunately, if you want to make money, you have to speak to as broad an audience as possible. No, you can't please everybody all the time, but really being able to define your audience and being honest about who those people are and genuinely interested in the things that they care about sort of allows you to tell them a story again that connects and that will bring them along, that includes them, that engages them, and that will lend to hopefully a new idea, maybe change behavior, maybe they'll buy a souvenir, whatever the sort of intended goal is. It just people really take for granted just the hard work involved in creating an idea that affects people.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to have people who are fans and people who are completely disinterested on a team for our product, for marketing campaigns for brand experience efforts because you're probably at that moment your healthy skepticism of like maybe you're a vodka drinker, maybe you just like wine, maybe you don't care about scotch at all, but that point of view, bringing that when you have someone who's a super fan, that's what happens a lot. If a strong voice is a super fan, all of a sudden you're playing inside baseball.
One of my favorite examples of this is something that we did. We did a tour experience for the Las Vegas Raiders in Las Vegas at their new stadium.
I was going to ask about that.
And this is something where, again, you have people coming in that are diehard Raiders fans. And, the Raiders fan, it already brings up an image in people's minds, right? Because they're very loud, they're very passionate. And but then you have people who hate the Raiders. And because and I don't know, I'm sorry, enough about football personally, but I heard that the Chiefs, right? Like the Chiefs don't really know the Raiders. There's some rivalry there. And one of our creative directors, Brad Shelton, who sort of was one of the leaders on that project, he talks about this time when, this man shows up in full red Kansas City Chiefs, gear, and he's just like so ready to hate the Raiders. And then at the end of the tour, he looked at his wife and said, "Well, how am I going to hate the Raiders now?" you know and so again, like the job is like, when we talk about sports experiences specifically, or honestly this applies to almost all of the work we do, but it's like one of the best ways to tell a story and to get people excited about a subject is to really lean into the reasons why the fans already care. If you listen to them, it's sort of like inherent to like, whatever's driving their passion. Like if you can sort of speak to those things and really lay out for them and present to them and excite them about the reasons why they already care, you can absolutely bring people into that story. And I think also with a subject like the Raiders, that tour, it talks about values like loyalty, values like just like passion. And so if you are someone who also believes in those things, if those things also matter to you, if the way that we're explaining how these Raiders live their life and how the organization functions and the things that they care about, if that aligns with you personally, you can't not leave a little bit of a fan of the Raiders, right? If nothing else, you might appreciate that organization, just a little bit more, which for us is a win.
Yeah, I mean, sports and football, and when people are fans, regardless of what team they're a fan of, it's a very emotional, very human thing. So the stories of each player, the stories of the history, it's very appealing and it's so universal. So you can really lean into that stuff. And I do think like, I'm a Packers fan, but I love the Raiders and I actually like the Chiefs. And it's usually the human stories of like where these teams came from, what they care about that pull you in. So I think you all really capitalized on that. I've had a few friends that went through your tours and experienced that, and they said it was really powerful stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not always the big media moment, right? It's not. It's the little stuff, right? Just over time, over the course of an hour and a half or however long we have you. It's that they call it, or our team refers to it as emotional choreography, right? Like how the first thing, it's like we sort of joke, don't put the dinosaur out front, right? And so when you go and visit a stadium, if the first thing you do is take people out onto the field, you're removing that climax, right? But if you can sort of do the tour in such a way that by the time you get out to the field, you feel the just immense, like, pride and power, and again, just the respect you have for these players having made it to this point. Like, all of a sudden, you step out onto the field with all of that energy and emotion, and it is a completely different experience. So that's just also how we think about these things and just the level of attention we pay to the stops along that tour, how X leads to Y leads to Z.
That's probably why they're so successful is, you're building anticipation, you're building drama, you're building emotional connection as you go along. And that's how all stories work. You're creating characters and then delivering on their journey. And, before I got into brand and marketing years and years ago, I was involved in theater. And I think that directing theater served my career better than all the marketing background I have.
Well, Steve, are you sure you don't work at BRC? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we do similar things, but for very different types of clients. We do a lot of financial, a lot of healthcare, and it's a different challenge, but it all comes down to the same stuff. It's all those little moments and those human things that we all can feel and connect with. Storytelling is so powerful, and when you kind of like read your own press or think, you start marketing or telling stories for yourself, that's when you fail. It's always about the audience and how they feel.
Right, and, w working at BRC, right, we're not we're not initiating our own projects. We're delivering on a client's goals. And so that's also always important to realize is that they have goals, objectives, KPIs, things that they need to meet and deliver on that live outside of us. And so we just have to be the best almost service providers that we can be to help them achieve their goals. And it's hard work, it's very difficult. But like you say, a lot of the people here at BRC, a lot of our leadership, they come from theater backgrounds. I myself have a performing arts background. I was a dancer before I decided that I wanted to make some money,
That's the same reason I left directing theater because I wanted to actually have a career that paid me money.
right? We're all wired a little bit differently, but so much of that work and the experience of like, and just the joy that comes from like putting on a show and making people smile, making someone's day just a little bit better. Like, I think that's something that we can all get excited about, and I think that's why, a lot of us come from these performing arts backgrounds because that's a part of it.
Yeah, and I think the people from performing arts backgrounds have the ability to leverage humanity in a way and speak to little emotional moments that can help clients meet their goals. Because a lot of times the clients are so close to it or they're thinking about the KPIs and what they need, they forget over and over again that it's a real human being out there you're talking to and what they feel is the only thing that matters.
Yeah, and you should say the surgeon can't operate on themselves.
Right, exactly. So they need us crazy theater people to get the stories out there in a way that resonates with human beings because that's what we've been gauging our entire lives is how does this land with the audience.
And I'll tell you, that's been I it like I am so beyond humbled and, like, so thrilled that I've been able to do that for BRC. You know, BRC is a company we've been around, like 44 years now. We were, started in 1981, and I was the first sort of I came in as the marketing director. My first task was to, like, rebrand the organization, or not even rebrand, but brand, right? Like, yeah, just to pull it all together, and I sort of came in, and my sort of motto was, "If it ain't broke, don't break it," right? So, like, we already had all the pieces here, we just gotta clean them up, organize them. But to your point, like, it's just so interesting for me to be able to take something that, again, so many people here care so much about, and to, like, be able to handle that with care on behalf of them, to tell the stories, not all of all the incredible people who worked at BRC, but yeah, I sort of had that task of helping BRC tell their story, and it's so funny feeding, a little bit of their own medicine back to them, right? Of in terms of, like, remember, these are the things that matter, these are the things that don't, and, like, how do we get down what is the lowest common denominator, the thing that we do across everything, all the things that we do that sort of makes us who we are, and so that was a lot of fun for me.
It's perfect to find someone who's a storyteller, whether you come from a background of dance or theater or however, that you're used to presenting stories to an audience, because what you're instinctually going to look for is those little things that are really at the core, that resonate emotionally. So, yeah, you've done a great job. BRC's marketing and storytelling is great. That's a perfect segue to your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So, you host a podcast on behalf of BRC called Masters of Storytelling. So you produce it, you host it. I'm assuming it was your idea as well.
Yes, yes.
So what inspired you to do this and how is it going and how's the world of podcasting for you?
As someone that honestly used to hate my voice, Like, the idea of hosting a podcast was something that I never wanted to do, we'll say, but this sort of started again, like, when I was looking at BRC's world and, like, digging into all the material, like, what's all the sort of raw source material that I can go use to tell BRC's story. It's like one of the things that came up was just how many fascinating people had passed through BRC's doors, like, so many incredible alumni, just but and the more I met and spent time with these people, I realized, like, if we wanted to do some kind of an alumni series, it would be such a shame to limit it to the written page. 'Cause, like, all the characters, the personalities, like, you need to, like, meet these people, you know? It's like it's impossible to fully encapsulate the essence of these people sometimes. And so in doing BRC's whole rebrand, again, I was talking about finding this lowest common denominator, that's what I call it, amongst all the industries we work with and all the markets we work with and all the capabilities and services that we offer. Just internally, there was a lot of conversation around, well, we do VIP, but we don't want to overemphasize that because it might take away a lot of the work we do for families, right? And for kids. Or, we work a lot in China, but we also work a lot in Europe and we also work a lot in the US. And we're working like regional communities, but then also like urban cities. And so um in thinking about all of that, the thing that was universal across everything we do is this idea of storytelling. And I found this quote that I love, that it's purposeful storytelling isn't show business, it's good business. So, everything we do sort of is in the realm of how we talk about storytelling, but how that leads to business impact. When doing the podcast, I really wanted to make it about storytelling in general. And again, because the work we do it's very much in the physical space, but it is the coming together of all these different mediums. So I wanted to shine a light on how storytellers bring story to all of their different mediums. So each episode, I interview different storytellers, like a costume designer, lighting designer, people that work in business. And so just to get all the different, to understand just how story is affected across all these mediums and industries and people's work. But the other thing I wanted to really point out was that, and again, I'm very passionate about creatives and the people, and I think it's really important, you can hire the biggest agencies, the biggest companies, but it's about Susan and John, right? Like, these
Yep.
people are the ones, it's Susan and John that will make sure that your campaign, your project is done well or that it sparkles, honestly. Um, and so oftentimes the most interesting storytellers have fascinating personal stories to tell themselves. Storytellers are just like us, right? And so, but I've had so much fun making the show. I have personally learned so much. I make it primarily with a friend of mine named Dylan Agajanian, an incredible music composer. So we've been so spoiled having like bespoke custom music made for each episode that also lends to each person's sort of theme and their essence.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I like that about your podcast. The music, that custom music is really a nice touch.
Thank you. Yeah, we're like I said, we're spoiled. Dylan's amazing. And so we've had a lot of fun putting the episodes together. But a part of it, I also realized pretty early on that as the host, I had to have a real clear point of view. Like, why am I, why me? I don't work on projects here at BRC. So who cares what I have to say? But I sort of realized that it's my sort of the things that excite me about the work that we do and the people who I'm interviewing. Maybe that's what will excite someone else. So
You stand in for the audience, You're exploring the world of BRC for the people listening in.
yeah, and just making sense of it in real time almost also.
You're humanizing it through talking and having these conversations because like you said, it's about Sally, it's about John, it's about these individual human beings. And I think when you're trying to tell a story about a company as big as BRC, how are you gonna do it if it's just gonna sound like, a brochure or it's gonna sound like, everything else. But when you get down to that human level and you're talking to this John or the Sally or the personalities that have told these incredible stories, you're purposefully marketing, you're doing something that's gonna help, but you're doing it on that micro human level so that someone might actually connect with the story. So I think it's great. I think you've done a really good job. You in your second season now?
Yes, or at least what I'm calling my second season. I'd put it down for, almost a year.
Did you really? Wow, that's a bit of a break.
It is a bit of a break because I'll be honest with you, when I started doing it, I think most people at BRC were kinda like, "Okay, like, you wanna do a podcast? Yeah, get in line." But, BRC's president, Carmel Lewis, she said to me, "The fact that you're passionate about this is reason enough to do it," and they gave me a budget, and I just honestly it was a big test, and I think for me at least, because it felt like my baby for so long, I sorta had to put it to sleep before anyone else could, and then, I was almost shocked, to find out that people were listening to it and they actually liked it, and so I was compelled to bring it back, but it has been a lot of fun, like, getting back into it. It's a lot of work. Again, I do it mostly alone, so I just do it when I can. We're not very fast, but it is a real labor of love, and like I said, I personally have learned a lot just making it and talking to these people, and so I try and distill just the insights, just the nuggets of how we can all be better, not only in our work, but in our lives.
I think that's great, and also doing that while being the marketer for BRC. You're informing your other marketing, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. By digging into these stories, you're learning and you're exploring and you're being one of the storytellers at BRC. So I think that's super cool. So good for you.
I've worked with creative agencies or a different beast than like if you're marketing like a consumer products company, So agencies, the playing field is different, the needs are different. Obviously the business model is very different. And so you really have to understand, I think, sometimes the game you're playing. Some people lose sight. It's like we all sort of fall back on like, oh, well, these are the things that we're supposed to do. We got the social media, the Instagram and the Twitter, and it's like people just check these boxes and it's like, well, who's on Twitter? Like, or like if you really think about your audience and like where they are when they're making that decision, like where they are when they're getting information, when they might be in a space to receive a new idea, versus again, that, like, decision-making process, like, sometimes people forget they start playing a game that's not theirs, and I think that sort of lends to a lot of wasted time and money and energy, but if you can, again, like, really focus on who you're talking to, what do they care about, and what do they need to hear that might catalyze this new idea or this action, that's a whole different game. So I enjoy that I get to do that on behalf of BRC, also because I genuinely believe and care about the work that we do.
Yeah. And I think, getting to host a podcast is you get to explore these stories and evangelize for BRC in a really human way that isn't salesy. And that's good marketing. So I hope you all keep doing it because I think it's a cool thing to do.
Well, thank you.
So, what's a trait of yours that you used to think as a weakness when you first started doing this that you've kind of learned to value?
It's an interesting question. It's a big question. Before I started business school, my closet looked a little bit like a vintage store, right? Like I used to wear a lot of like men's shirts and like just like weird stuff. And then I went to business school and I all of a sudden felt now I need to be corporate. I won't be respected or I won't be seen as someone that can do the job or that can be trusted to do the job if I don't have glasses. They're a little bit square and like you put on that corporate costume and then an experience. I moved to Berlin for a few years and that was also a bit disorienting for me in terms of just feeling wrong all the time. I don't speak the language, like I'm black, I'm an American, and it's like it creates this whole foreigners complex. And so it wasn't until I moved back home to LA, and I had a couple conversations with people who were very important to me, and I started to realize that I was feeling this tension between who I am and who I felt like I needed to be at work professionally. And so something that I realized is like, I like to have a lot of fun while I work, and I am the kind of person where I've always been able to have fun and get my work done. Teachers in elementary school will tell my mom that Maya distracts the whole class and she'll be the only one that gets her work done. So fortunately, I don't distract the class anymore. But I realize that the fact that I am colorful and I am multidimensional, and there are all these things that I like to do, that all of that's okay. And I can be all these things at once instead of feeling like I needed to choose and like show up and like really plays XYZ part for the next couple hours. And so being able to really bring my whole self and to be like, you know, just like relaxed and like I can get the job done. And, BRC is a company I will say that was one of the first employers I had that just took me seriously off the bat. And so that's also just allowed me to just further refine my style and how I work and how I communicate and like just being able to be myself at work and not feel like I had to like fit the corporate archetype.
Well, I think everyone goes through a phase where they feel like they have to play a character in business. Like I'm a business person and that's my character. And I think the sooner you learn to bring your whole self to things, the more successful you are. And if you bring your whole self to somewhere and they don't like it, that's a great signal that you shouldn't be there. So I'm glad you found a home where they accept that and they celebrate it for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, me too. I'll tell you, me too. But it's been a fun personal journey of just like coloring myself. I started to erase myself and it's just been fun coloring myself back in.
Good for you. Keep it up. And I'm sure the podcast is part of that. And that's like, I honestly, I always encourage people, the more color and the more passion and the more of yourself you can authentically bring to your role, the more you're going to enjoy it and the more you're going to really offer everyone else. So what would you call this chapter of your life right now?
Well, I like to say I'm gonna peak when I'm 78. That's when I'll be like cover of Time, and I'm not kidding. That's like, that's like I just wanna peak when there's a very, short down ramp, we'll say. I think I'm in the chapter of just creating myself, personally, which I have learned. I sort of give each year mine a theme. So last year the theme was change. This year the theme was creation. And as I've learned, creation, like change is baked into creation, right? Anything you're building will require some degree of change. And so we'll call it level two maybe. But yeah, I'm just enjoying the idea of making my life, and creating my life and just sort of really, I spent a lot of time this year and last year getting to know myself and just really honestly, there's a lot of unlearning that happens as an adult in terms of what's right for me versus what's right for everyone else. And just being honest about the things that I need to feel good and be happy and feel productive and like I'm a valuable member of society and like I have, valuable, meaningful relationships. And so that's what I guess, yeah, it's like how the chapter of creation.
Good for you. That's like great to hear. I think that's a wonderful place to be and a great message for anybody listening. So, final question. I always end on this question. What advice would you give if you could to your younger self right now?
Don't stop. Just keep going. I mean, just that's the advice I would give. Just keep going. The worst thing you can do is stop. Um, and so, you know, uh, life is imperfect. People are imperfect. Almost nothing feels the way sometimes we want things to feel. But I think that if we can give ourselves a little bit of grace and just keep doing our best, that's the best all of us can do. I don't think I'm unique, but I sort of grew up understanding what the best looked like. I sort of grew up from a young age very exposed to like excellence. And what happens is anything below that starts to feel uh wrong. Like this isn't excellent, so it's not good enough, or maybe it's not worth doing. Or maybe it's embarrassing and I shouldn't show anyone, right? And so it's just again giving ourselves the grace to try to put ourselves out there and just don't stop.
I love that. Well, that is a wonderful final thought. And thank you so much. I wish you and BRC so much continued success. And I love where you are right now, and I love that advice. I think that's advice all of us should take at any point in our lives. Don't worry about being a mess now and then. Just keep going.
Just keep going. Yeah.
Make your mistakes. Don't judge yourself so harshly about what you think you see in others, and just keep going.
I will say just on a final note, I went to a concert. There's an artist, BJ, the Chicago kid, this incredible singer, songwriter, artist. And he says in his show that no matter what happens, like, we're always okay. And I think it's just worth reminding ourselves again, like, no matter what happens, like, we are always, always okay.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for that. Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app. so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.